At Brooke's husband's company's big launch event, she had planned to reveal that she was the heir to a billionaire fortune and announce their relationship to the world. She arrived wearing the emerald dress Chase bought her, carrying speech cards where she'd written her big revelation about being his anonymous investor and wanting to build an empire together. She was nervous but excited, believing this moment would mark the beginning of their transparent future. Before we continue, I want to thank you for joining me in sharing stories of betrayal and triumph. If you believe everyone deserves to know the truth in relationships, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps us reach more people who need to hear this. The past 6 years had been a carefully constructed performance. Brooke Hawthorne, sole heir to a $3 billion pharmaceutical empire, had spent those years living under a false identity. She'd presented herself as a modest freelance designer with middle-class means, married Chase Blackwood to ensure his love was genuine rather than motivated by her wealth. Throughout their marriage, she'd secretly funded his struggling biotech company, Blackwood Industries, through anonymous investments totaling millions of dollars, saving it from bankruptcy 3 times while he believed he was building his success through his own brilliance. The speech cards in Brooke's clutch felt like they were burning through the leather. She'd rewritten them a dozen times, trying to find the perfect words to explain why she'd hidden her identity, why she'd let him struggle when she could have made everything easy with a single phone call. But she needed to know, needed to be certain that when he looked at her, he saw Brooke, not the Hawthorne fortune, not the pharmaceutical empire, not the connections and power that came with her last name. The ballroom of Blackwood Industries gleamed with the kind of opulence that spoke of success. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased Manhattan glittering 40 floors below. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in white linen. Servers in crisp uniforms circulated with champagne and canapes. Investors, board members, and journalists mingled in clusters, their voices creating a sophisticated hum of conversation and ambition. Brooke moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations from people who thought she was just the supportive wife. They praised Chase's vision, his dedication, his brilliant business acumen. Each compliment made her smile a little wider, knowing the truth they'd all learn soon enough. She wasn't just his supportive wife. She was the reason any of this existed. The emerald dress Chase had bought her fit perfectly, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel beautiful and powerful. He'd given it to her last month for their anniversary, saying it matched her eyes. She'd been so touched by the gesture, especially when he'd been so consumed with preparing for tonight's launch. Now, wearing it as she prepared to reveal her true identity felt symbolic. He dressed her for this moment without even knowing it. Nina had texted her earlier that morning. "Are you really going through with telling him tonight? Please reconsider. Something feels wrong about all this." But Brooke had dismissed her friend's concerns. Nina was overprotective, always had been. She was the only person who knew about the Hawthorne inheritance, about the anonymous investments, about the years of hiding in plain sight. Of course she was worried. But tonight was going to be perfect. Chase would be shocked, certainly, but then he'd understand. They'd laugh about her elaborate deception. They'd celebrate the fact that they could build something incredible together, openly this time, as equals. Brooke accepted a champagne flute from a passing server and took a sip, letting the bubbles calm her nerves. Around her, people discussed market projections and research breakthroughs. She recognized several board members, investors who'd put money into Blackwood over the years, never knowing they were actually betting on Hawthorne capital funneled through shell companies. Harrison Blackstone, her estate lawyer, had called that morning to confirm everything was in order. The documentation proving her identity, the records of her anonymous investments, the shell company paperwork, all of it was ready to be projected on the massive screen behind the podium when the moment came. She'd spent weeks coordinating the technical aspects, ensuring she could take control of the presentation system when she needed to. "Brooke Blackwood, isn't it?" The voice came from behind her, smooth and confident with an edge that made Brooke's shoulders tense before she even turned around. When she did, she found herself face to face with Dr. Leah Morrison, head of research development at Blackwood Industries. Brooke had seen her from a distance at company events, always perfectly put together, always commanding attention. Up close, she was even more striking, tall and blonde, with the kind of confidence that came from never doubting your place in the world. Her black cocktail dress probably cost more than Brooke supposedly earned in a month, And her perfume, something expensive and distinctive, Tom Ford's Black Orchid maybe, hit Brooke immediately. Yes, Brooke replied, keeping her voice pleasant. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. No, we haven't. Leah's smile was sharp, showing too many teeth. I thought that should change. Would you mind stepping over here for a moment? I have something I'd like to discuss with you. Privately. Something in her tone made Brooke's stomach clench, but she followed Leah to a quieter corner of the venue, away from the main clusters of guests. Through the windows, the city sparkled below them, oblivious to whatever was about to unfold. Leah turned to face her, and the professional facade she'd worn while they walked dropped completely. Her smile became cruel, her eyes cold and assessing. I thought you should hear this from me directly, she said, her voice dropping to a tone that suggested intimacy, conspiracy. You're being replaced. The words hung in the air between them. Brooke's champagne flute suddenly felt impossibly heavy in her hand. Excuse me? Chase and I are together, Leah continued, her confidence absolute. And after tonight's funding announcement, he's filing for divorce. You've served your purpose, playing the supportive little wife, but he needs someone who actually understands his work. Someone from his world. Brooke's vision narrowed to a tunnel, all the noise of the party fading to a distant hum. She couldn't be hearing this correctly. This couldn't be happening. Not tonight. Not when she'd planned everything so carefully. Leah held up her left hand, and a ring caught the light. Not on her ring finger, not yet, but on her right hand, waiting. The diamond was substantial, surrounded by smaller stones in an intricate setting. He proposed 3 weeks ago. We've been planning our future together. The speech cards in Brooke's clutch suddenly felt like they were made of lead. All those carefully written words about love and partnership and building an empire together, they belonged to a reality that apparently didn't exist. I don't understand, Brooke managed, though her voice sounded distant to her own ears. This is some kind of joke. It's not a joke. Leah's laugh was light, dismissive. Chase and I have been together for over a year. Surely you noticed something? The late nights? The Tuesday lunch dates? She paused, watching Brooke's face with the clinical interest of a scientist observing a reaction. That romantic weekend in Boston, he told you was a business conference? Boston. The weekend he'd claimed he was pulling all-nighters at the lab. Brooke had found the hotel receipt later, tucked in his gym bag. The Ritz-Carlton, a king suite, room service for 2, champagne at midnight. When she'd asked him about Boston, he'd looked her straight in the eye and said he hadn't been there in months. We go to Chez Laurent every Tuesday, Leah continued, clearly enjoying herself now. That French restaurant downtown? The one with the private booths? Chase loves the duck confit. Always orders the same wine. We've become quite predictable, actually. The staff knows us by name. Every Tuesday, Chase came home late, claiming meetings ran long. Brooke had never questioned it, had made him dinner that she'd keep warm in the oven, had believed every word he said because she loved him and love meant trust. Why are you telling me this? Brooke asked, her voice steadier now, though her hands were shaking. Because I'm being generous. Leah's eyes swept over Brooke's dress, her modest jewelry, her carefully maintained appearance of middle-class normalcy. You should make this easy. Accept the inevitable. Chase needs a partner who can navigate his world, someone with the right background and education. Someone from a pharmaceutical family who understands the industry. She leaned in slightly, her voice taking on a condescending tone. Someone more suitable than a freelance designer who shops at Target. The contempt in her voice was palpable. Leah viewed her as unsophisticated, financially dependent, playing dress-up in a world she didn't belong in. A nobody who'd somehow convinced Chase Blackwood to marry her, but whose time was finally up. Harvard Medical School, Leah added, as if Brooke might not understand the significance. My father's in pharmaceuticals too. Old money. The kind of connections that will complement Chase's ambitions perfectly. You understand what I'm saying, don't you? You're not equipped for this life. But I am. The ring on Leah's finger caught the light again as she gestured, and Brooke realized the full scope of her arrogance. She thought she was doing Brooke a favor, offering her a reality check from a position of superiority. She thought she was the sophisticated woman replacing an unsophisticated one, that she was offering Brooke an exit from a world she didn't belong in anyway. What Leah didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she was standing in a building that only existed because of Brooke's money. Every major investment, every emergency capital injection, Every bridge loan that had kept Blackwood Industries alive, all of it came from Hawthorne Holdings. The understanding of his work that Leah claimed to possess was research funded entirely by Brooke's hidden fortune. The company launch they were celebrating existed solely because Brooke had made it possible. The irony was so profound it nearly made Brooke laugh. Leah stood there, flashing an engagement ring that Chase had probably bought with money that ultimately came from Brooke's inheritance, telling her she was being replaced, that she wasn't good enough, that she didn't understand Chase's world. "I see," Brooke said quietly, her mind racing through possibilities, through consequences, through the careful plan she'd made that was now completely irrelevant. "Thank you for telling me." Leah's smile widened, clearly pleased with Brooke's apparent compliance. "I'm glad you're being reasonable about this. Some women would make a scene, but I can tell you're smart enough to recognize when you're outmatched." She patted Brooke's arm with false sympathy. "You'll find someone more suitable to your station. I'm sure of it." Your station. As if Brooke was some servant being dismissed, some temporary help that had outlived her usefulness. Leah turned to walk away, completely confident in her victory, completely ignorant of the woman she'd just cornered. Brooke stood there for a moment, the champagne flute still in her hand, watching Leah rejoin the crowd with the ease of someone who belonged. Around her, the party continued, oblivious. Investors discussing portfolios, board members congratulating each other, journalists hunting for angles and stories. Chase was somewhere in the crowd, probably preparing for his big moment at the podium, probably planning how he'd thank his supportive wife before moving forward with the divorce that would free him to be with Leah. The speech cards in her clutch felt different now. Not a love letter she was about to deliver, but evidence of her own naivety. She'd spent 6 years testing Chase's love, hiding her wealth to ensure he wanted her for herself, and the entire time he'd been planning to leave her anyway. She'd funded his dreams while he plotted her replacement. She'd saved his company while he stole from their joint accounts to build an exit strategy with another woman. Brooke's hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear settled over her, sharpening her thoughts, focusing her fury into something precise and purposeful. She pulled out her phone and dialed Harrison Blackstone. "Harrison," she said when he answered, her voice completely steady now. "I need you to accelerate everything we discussed. I want security personnel positioned strategically throughout the venue. I want technical capabilities confirmed. And I want you ready to execute those transfers immediately when I give the signal." "Is everything all right?" Harrison asked, his decades of legal experience probably sensing something had changed. "Everything is perfect," Brooke replied. "Better than perfect, actually. I'm about to teach some very important lessons about assumptions and power." She ended the call and sent a text to Nina. "You were right. Something was wrong. But I'm handling it. Trust me." The response came immediately. "What happened? Do you need me to come there?" "No. Just watch the news later. I promise it will be spectacular." Brooke moved through the crowd with new purpose, no longer the nervous woman hoping to surprise her husband with a touching revelation. She was Brooke Hawthorne now, heir to a pharmaceutical empire, and she was done hiding, done pretending, done being underestimated by people who thought wealth and breeding and Harvard degrees made them superior to everyone else. She spotted Chase near the podium, talking with board members, looking confident and handsome in his tailored suit. The suit she'd bought him with Hawthorne money he didn't know existed. He saw her and smiled, that warm, affectionate smile that had once made her heart race. Now it made her stomach turn. He excused himself from his conversation and walked over, pulling her into a brief embrace. "You look beautiful," he whispered against her ear. "Are you ready for tonight? I have a huge surprise planned for after the announcement." "I'm sure you do," Brooke replied, her smile never wavering. "I have a surprise too, actually." "Really?" He seemed genuinely curious. "What kind of surprise?" "You'll see. During your speech, maybe." I thought it might be nice to say a few words. Something flickered in his eyes. Concern, maybe, or annoyance. "Sweetheart, I don't know if that's a good idea. These are important investors, and the timing is very carefully planned." "I insist," Brooke said firmly. 6 years of marriage, Chase. Surely I've earned the right to speak at your company's biggest moment." He studied her face, probably trying to gauge whether she suspected anything, whether this was some kind of test. But Brooke's expression remained pleasant, supportive, the perfect wife he'd grown so comfortable underestimating. "Of course," he finally said, though his smile had tightened slightly. If it means that much to you. It does. The lights dimmed, and Chase squeezed her hand before heading to the podium. Brooke positioned herself near the stage, close enough to watch his performance, close enough to see Leah moving to a prominent spot near the front, probably anticipating her introduction as the new head of research development. Ladies and gentlemen, Chase began, his voice carrying that practiced warmth he deployed at investor meetings. Tonight marks the culmination of 6 years of innovation, dedication, and breakthrough science. Blackwood Industries stands ready to revolutionize genetic therapy, and we couldn't have done it without each and every one of you. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Brooke watched Leah watching Chase, saw the proprietary satisfaction in her expression. She thought she'd won. They both did. Chase continued his speech, outlining projections and market opportunities, using words like synergy and paradigm shift. He was good at this, commanding the room with confidence and charisma. But every word felt hollow to Brooke now, a performance by a man who'd built his entire life on lies and other people's money. Before we continue with the technical presentation, Chase said, his smile broadening, I want to take a moment to thank someone very special. My wife, Brooke, who has been my rock throughout this journey. Sweetheart, would you come up here? The crowd turned to her, applauding warmly. This was the moment he'd use her, parade her as the devoted wife one last time before discarding her. Brooke set down her champagne and walked toward the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor with steady precision. Chase extended his hand to help her up the steps, his palm warm and dry, completely confident. He pulled her close, kissing her cheek for the cameras that were already flashing. Isn't she wonderful? He said into the microphone, his arm around her waist. 6 years of supporting my dream, never complaining about the late nights or endless meetings. I couldn't have done this without her. The crowd applauded again. Brooke saw several people dabbing at their eyes, moved by this display of marital devotion. If only they knew. Actually, Brooke said, her voice carrying across the room before Chase could continue. I'd like to say a few words, if you don't mind. Chase's arm tightened around her waist, but his smile never wavered. Of course, darling. She gently extracted herself from his grip and took the microphone, feeling its weight settle in her hand like a weapon she'd been waiting to wield. Thank you all for being here tonight, Brooke began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. This is indeed a momentous occasion. But before we celebrate, I think there's something the audience should know. She paused, letting the tension build, letting every eye in the room focus on her. Dr. Morrison, would you mind standing up? Leah looked startled, clearly not expecting to be called out. But she stood, probably assuming this was some kind of acknowledgement of her work, some preliminary introduction before Chase made his announcement. Dr. Morrison approached me earlier this evening, Brooke continued, watching Leah's face begin to change as she realized this wasn't going where she expected. She told me I was being replaced, that I'd served my purpose as the supportive little wife, but Chase needed someone who actually understood his work, someone from his world. Brooke's smile was sharp now, cutting. I thought the audience might be interested in knowing exactly what purpose I've served. The room had gone completely silent, that breathless quiet that precedes something explosive. Phones appeared in hands, sensing a story unfolding. You see, Chase has had an anonymous investor these past 6 years, Brooke said, pulling out her phone and connecting it to the presentation system. Harrison had ensured this would work flawlessly. Someone who believed in his vision enough to invest millions when banks wouldn't lend him a penny. Someone who saved Blackwood from bankruptcy not once, not twice, but 3 times. The massive screen behind her flickered to life, showing bank records, transfer documents, shell company paperwork. Millions of dollars flowing from Hawthorne Holdings to Blackwood Industries, each transaction dated and documented. That investor was me, Brooke announced, her voice ringing with power she'd kept hidden for far too long. I'm Brooke Hawthorne, sole heir to Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals, and every penny that built this company came from my inheritance. My money. The money that Dr. Morrison thinks I don't have because I shop at Target. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was almost physical. Chase's face had gone completely white, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Leah looked like she'd been struck, her confidence evaporating in real time. I spent 6 years hiding my identity, Brooke continued, clicking through slides that showed her father's pharmaceutical empire, the Hawthorne family holdings, her position as sole heir. I wanted to be sure Chase loved me for myself, not my fortune. I funded his company anonymously, through shell companies and careful investments, because I believed in him, because I loved him. Another click, and the screen filled with documentation of Chase's embezzlement. Transfers to personal accounts, fabricated invoices, expense reports for trips that were personal, not business. The Boston hotel bill, charged to the company, for a romantic weekend with his mistress. But while I was testing his love, Brooks said, her voice hardening, he was stealing from the company I was funding, embezzling money to build his exit strategy, planning to divorce me and marry Dr. Morrison, who he's been having an affair with for over a year. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Cameras flashed. Journalists started shouting questions. Chase tried to grab the microphone, but Brooks stepped back, keeping control. The engagement ring Dr. Morrison showed me earlier, Brooke continued, looking directly at Leah, whose face had gone from pale to gray, was bought with money that ultimately came from my inheritance. You thought you were replacing me, Dr. Morrison. You thought you were the sophisticated woman who understood his world, while I was just some nobody playing dress-up. But you were actually sleeping with a man who was living on his wife's secret fortune. You were the mistress of a thief, and you didn't even know it. Leah sank back into her chair, the engagement ring on her hand now a symbol of her own ignorance rather than her triumph. And Chase, Brooke turned to her husband, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. You called me naive. You said I had no idea what was really going on. You were right. I didn't know you were stealing from me. I didn't know you were planning to leave me. But I do know this. Everything you built exists because I made it possible. And now, I'm taking it all back. She clicked to the final slide, showing the transfer orders Harrison had executed. As of 30 minutes ago, all anonymous funding to Blackwood Industries has been frozen and recalled. Every emergency loan, every capital injection, every bridge loan that kept this company alive, I've called it all back. The patents and research will be acquired by Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals. The legitimate employees will be offered positions with better pay and actual ethics oversight. But this company, this fraud built on my money and his lies, it ends tonight. The room exploded into chaos. Board members rushed toward Chase, their faces contorted with fury. Investors were already on their phones, probably calling lawyers. Journalists pushed forward with cameras and microphones, capturing every moment of the collapse. Through the noise, Brooke heard the distinctive sound of footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful, the kind of footsteps that came with authority and badges. One more thing, Brooke said into the microphone, her voice cutting through the chaos. I forwarded all documentation of the embezzlement and fraud to federal investigators 3 hours ago. I believe they're here now. FBI agents entered the ballroom, their presence immediately commanding attention. The crowd parted as they approached the stage. Chase Blackwood, the lead agent, announced, "You're under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and corporate fraud." They read him his rights while attaching handcuffs, the clicks echoing in the sudden silence. Another pair of agents approached Leah, who tried to slip toward an exit. "Dr. Leah Morrison, you're under arrest for corporate espionage and conspiracy to commit fraud." "What?" Leah's voice cracked, her composure finally shattering completely. "I didn't do anything. We have evidence you've been selling proprietary research to competitors," the agent replied calmly, billing Blackwood for consulting fees that never occurred. "Your arrest warrant is very detailed." As they led both Chase and Leah away in handcuffs, Brooks set down the microphone and walked off the stage. The crowd parted for her automatically, no one quite sure what to say or do in the wake of what they'd just witnessed. Brooks' phone was already buzzing with messages. Harrison confirming the transfers were complete. Nina asking if she was okay, if she needed anything. Unknown numbers that were probably reporters wanting statements. She ignored all of them and walked to the elevator, pressing the button for the ground floor. As the doors closed, she caught one last glimpse of the ballroom in chaos, of the company Chase thought he'd built crumbling in real time, of the investors and board members realizing they'd been celebrating a fraud. The elevator descended in blessed silence. 40 floors of dropping through space while above her, her old life imploded spectacularly. Outside, Manhattan continued its endless rhythm, unaware that in a ballroom 40 stories up, a marriage had ended, a company had collapsed, and a woman who'd hidden her power for 6 years had finally stepped into the light. Brooke's car was waiting where she'd parked it, in the visitor section. She'd known, somehow, that she wouldn't be parking beside Chase's BMW ever again. She slid behind the wheel and sat there for a moment, her hands on the steering wheel, breathing in the strange new reality she'd created. Her phone rang. Harrison Blackstone. I watched the live stream, he said without preamble. Several reporters were broadcasting. You handled that masterfully. I need the divorce papers filed first thing tomorrow morning. Brooke replied, her voice surprisingly steady. And all joint assets frozen immediately. Already in motion. The prenuptial agreement Chase insisted on is actually quite favorable to you. It protects all premarital assets and inheritances. He essentially locked himself out of the Hawthorne fortune without realizing it existed. The irony made Brooke's laugh sound bitter even to her own ears. Chase had been so concerned about protecting his assets from a gold-digging wife that he'd signed away any claim to her billions. She drove to the Hamptons estate, the one she'd inherited when her father died but had never lived in, keeping it maintained through a management company while she played at being middle-class in Manhattan. The drive took 2 hours through empty highways, giving her time to process what had just happened. Nina called 3 times before Brooke finally answered. What happened? Nina demanded. I've seen clips online, but I need to hear it from you. Are you okay? Leah Morrison told me I was being replaced, Brooke said, the words coming out flat, factual. She told me about the affair, showed me an engagement ring, explained that Chase needed someone more suitable, someone from his world. She was so confident, so sure that she understood the power dynamics better than I did. Oh, Brooke. She didn't know anything. She thought she was replacing some naive, unsophisticated wife, and instead she was sleeping with a man who was living on money from the woman she thought she was better than. Brooke's laugh was sharp. I revealed everything. The Hawthorne inheritance, the anonymous investments, Chase's embezzlement. The FBI arrested them both. Both? Apparently Leah was selling proprietary research to competitors. Corporate espionage. They found evidence when they started investigating Chase's finances. Brooke pulled through the gates of the estate, motion sensors triggering lights that illuminated her father's house. 20 rooms of pristine loneliness. I'm at the Hamptons house. Can you come? I'm already in my car, Nina replied. I'll be there in 90 minutes. The house echoed with Brooke's footsteps as she walked through rooms she'd only visited a handful of times. The foyer alone was larger than most apartments, with a chandelier that had supposedly belonged to some railroad baron. Her father's study overlooked the Atlantic, endless dark water stretching to the horizon. Brooke stood at the window and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the messages that kept coming. Unknown numbers, reporters wanting statements, colleagues of Chase expressing shock. A few messages from people she'd known before she'd gone into hiding, people who suddenly remembered she existed now that she'd revealed herself. One message stood out. From Richard Klein, one of Blackwood's board members. Ms. Hawthorne, we need to discuss the company's future. The research team is asking about their jobs. Please call me. The research team. Scientists who'd done good work despite Chase's incompetence, who'd believed they were working for something meaningful. They didn't deserve to suffer because their CEO was a fraud. When Nina arrived, she found Brooke in the study, surrounded by documents Harrison had sent over. Contracts, acquisition papers, employee records from Blackwood Industries. What are you doing? Nina asked, setting down a bottle of wine she'd brought. Figuring out what happens next, Brooke replied. The research is actually valuable. The scientists did good work. Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals is going to acquire the patents and offer positions to anyone who wants them. You're rebuilding. I'm building something better. Brooke looked up from the documents. Something ethical. Something that puts people before profit. Everything Chase claimed he was doing, but never actually did. They drank wine from proper glasses this time. No paper cups from gas stations, sitting in leather chairs worth more than most people's cars, watching news coverage of the scandal on the television. Every business channel was running the story. Someone had edited together clips from the live-streamed confrontation, Brooke's voice clear and damning as she revealed both her identity and Chase's betrayal. The ticker at the bottom read, Pharmaceutical heiress exposes husband's fraud at company launch. Analysts were already speculating about what this meant for Blackwood Industries. One expert said, without the Hawthorne funding, which apparently accounted for the majority of their capital, the company is essentially worthless. Add in the fraud allegations and the FBI investigation, and we're looking at complete collapse. Another analyst focused on Leah Morrison. The corporate espionage charges are particularly damaging. If Dr. Morrison was selling research to competitors while employed at Blackwood, it raises serious questions about what other breaches may have occurred. This could impact partnerships across the industry. Brooke watched them dissect her marriage, her choices, her revelation, with the detached interest of someone watching a story about strangers. Except it wasn't strangers. It was her life, exploded across every screen in the country. Her phone buzzed with a text from Harrison. Federal agents completed their search of Blackwood Industries. They found extensive evidence of Morrison's espionage dating back 18 months. She was being paid by 3 different competitors. Chase apparently knew nothing about it. So Leah had been playing Chase the same way he'd been playing Brooke. Everyone in that ballroom thinking they were the clever ones, the ones in control, while they were all deceiving each other. The only difference was that Brooke had actually held all the power, and she'd been the only one who knew it. The bankruptcy proceedings moved swiftly. By the following Tuesday, less than a week after the launch event, Blackwood Industries had filed for Chapter 7 liquidation. Without Hawthorne funding, the company had no viable path forward. Investors who'd lost millions were already filing lawsuits, though there was nothing left to sue for. Chase's assets, protected by the prenup he'd thought was protecting him from Brooke, turned out to be minimal. Everything he'd thought he owned had actually been funded by her inheritance. Harrison arranged for Hawthorne Pharmaceuticals to acquire the patent portfolio and research assets. The bid was $10 million for everything, a fraction of what the research was actually worth, but no one else wanted to touch anything associated with the scandal. The scientists will keep their jobs, Harrison confirmed during a video call. We're offering better salaries and actual research budgets. Several have already accepted. What about Chase and Leah? Brooke asked, both still in federal custody. Chase's lawyer is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but given the amount of money involved and the public nature of the case, prosecutors aren't being generous. Dr. Morrison's situation is worse. Corporate espionage carries serious penalties, and she sold research to multiple competitors. She's looking at significant prison time. The news coverage continued for weeks, each development adding new angles to the story. The engagement ring Chase had bought for Leah became a particular point of fascination. Reporters tracked down the jeweler, who confirmed the purchase and the price tag, $85,000, charged to a credit card that was linked to the joint accounts Chase shared with Brooke. He'd bought his mistress an engagement ring with his wife's money that had come from the very inheritance he didn't know existed. Nina moved into the Hamptons estate temporarily, helping Brooke sort through the aftermath. They spent long hours in the study, managing the transition of Blackwood's assets, coordinating with the research team, and planning Hawthorne's new direction. You're handling this better than I expected, Nina observed one evening, watching Brooke review employee contracts. I feel nothing, Brooke admitted. I thought I'd feel angry or vindicated or heartbroken, but mostly I just feel empty. Like I wasted 6 years on someone who was never real. He was real. He was just real garbage. That made Brooke laugh, the first genuine laugh she'd experienced since the launch event. Fair assessment. Eleanor Blackwood showed up at the estate 3 weeks after the arrests, somehow getting past security to appear at the front door. Brooke considered not letting her in, but curiosity won. She wanted to see what Chase's mother would say now that all the pretense was gone. The woman who entered the study looked nothing like the Eleanor who'd criticized Brooke's housekeeping and questioned her worthiness. Her usually perfect appearance had deteriorated noticeably. Her hair needed coloring. Her clothes looked slept in, and her eyes held the kind of desperation that came from watching your entire world collapse. Please, Eleanor said before Brooke could speak, practically collapsing into a chair without being invited. You have to help him. You have to tell them this is all a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Brooke replied calmly. Your son embezzled millions of dollars, committed fraud, and destroyed the lives of hundreds of employees who trusted him. He made mistakes, but he doesn't deserve to lose everything. He's my only child, Brooke. Surely you can understand a mother's love. Brooke thought about all the times Eleanor had compared her unfavorably to Leah Morrison. The constant suggestions that Chase had married beneath himself. The subtle and not-so-subtle insults about her supposed middle-class background. The way Eleanor had championed Leah as the kind of woman who would be more suitable for her son. "I can't help Chase," Brooke said firmly. "He created this situation through his own choices. But I can ensure your personal trust fund remains protected from the civil suits, the one your late husband established. It's modest, but it will keep you comfortable." Eleanor sobbed with what might have been relief or continued desperation. When she left, Nina found Brooke standing at the window again, watching the ocean. "That was more generous than she deserved," Nina said. "She's a bitter woman who raised a son in her image," Brooke replied. "But she doesn't deserve to be homeless because Chase turned out exactly like she taught him to be." The sentencing came 4 months after the arrests. Chase received 5 years in federal prison for fraud and embezzlement. His lawyer had managed to negotiate down from the initial 7 years prosecutors wanted, but 5 years was still substantial. Leah received 7 years for corporate espionage, with federal prosecutors making an example of her case to deter others in the industry. Brooke didn't attend the sentencing, but she watched the news coverage. Chase being led into the courthouse, his expensive suit replaced with a prison jumpsuit. Leah crying as the judge read her sentence. Her Harvard credentials and pharmaceutical family connections meaning nothing now. The Blackwood Industries executive floor was completely renovated under Hawthorne ownership. Most of it became research laboratories, giving the scientists the resources they'd never received under Chase's leadership. But his office, that corner suite where he'd probably planned his betrayal and conducted his affair, became a supply closet. Shelves of printer paper and toner cartridges where his ego had once lived. Brooke supervised the renovation personally, watching workers throw his leather couch into a dumpster. The same couch where he'd probably promised Leah they'd be together soon, where he'd planned Brooke's replacement. It landed with a satisfying crash, frames splintering, leather splitting. Dr. Patricia Kim from the research team sent a message that Brooke kept on her phone. "Ms. Hawthorne, thank you for saving our jobs and our work. We won't let you down." 6 months later, under Hawthorne's leadership, the team completed the genetic therapy breakthrough Chase had promised but never delivered. The research he'd claimed credit for, funded by Brooke's inheritance, conducted by scientists he'd underpaid and undervalued, finally succeeded. Clinical trials showed unprecedented results, and the pharmaceutical community that had once celebrated Chase now recognized the work for what it truly was, a triumph of dedicated scientists supported by ethical leadership. The invitation to speak at the Global Pharmaceutical Innovation Summit arrived on a Tuesday. They wanted Brooke to deliver the keynote address, to stand before industry leaders and explain Hawthorne's new direction. The same podium where Chase had planned his moment of glory would now be hers. Brooke stood before the mirror that morning, but this time she wasn't hiding anything. The Cartier watch gleamed on her wrist. The designer suit cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her reflection showed someone confident without arrogance, powerful without cruelty, authentic in a way she'd never been allowed to be when she was pretending to be ordinary. Nina, now Hawthorne's chief operating officer, wore a suit that probably cost more than she'd made in a year at her old job. She'd earned every penny, helping Brooke transform her father's company into something revolutionary. "Good morning," Brooke began when she took the podium, her voice carrying clearly through the conference center. 6 months ago, many of you witnessed what happens when ambition operates without ethics, when success is built on deception rather than genuine innovation. Today, I'm here to show you what we've built instead. The presentation outlined Hawthorne's transformation. Profit sharing for every employee. Anonymous ethics reporting that actually resulted in action. Open source sharing of certain research to advance the field rather than just their bottom line. And the gene therapy breakthrough that Chase had promised but never delivered, now actually working in clinical trials. "We've proven that ethical business isn't just morally correct," Brooke continued. "It's also more profitable. Our researchers are more innovative when they're not afraid. Our partnerships are stronger when built on transparency. Our innovations are more meaningful when they're designed to help people rather than just generate revenue." The questions afterward were probing but respectful. Someone asked if she regretted how everything had unfolded, the public nature of the revelation. "I regret that it was necessary," Brooke answered honestly. "I regret that I had to hide who I was for 6 years to test someone's love. But I don't regret exposing the truth. Fraud thrives in darkness. Sometimes you need a spotlight to kill it. Another person asked about Chase, about whether she'd spoken to him since the sentencing. No, Brooke said simply. And I don't intend to. He made his choices. He's living with the consequences. My focus is on building something better, something that honors the work of people who deserve recognition and support. She was walking to her car after the conference when she saw him. Chase stood outside the federal courthouse 2 blocks away, his lawyer beside him. He'd been transported for some kind of hearing, probably related to the civil suits still pending. 5 years of minimum security had just been handed down, and he'd serve at least 3 before possibility of parole. He saw Brooke at the same moment and froze. For a second, they just looked at each other across the distance. Then he pulled away from his lawyer and walked toward her with determined steps. "Brooke," he said when he was close enough. The prison jumpsuit had been replaced with street clothes for the hearing, but they hung on him differently. He'd lost weight, gained lines around his eyes and mouth. "You destroyed everything," he continued, his voice carrying an edge of accusation even now. "You planned it all along, hiding who you were, waiting for the perfect moment to humiliate me." Brooke almost laughed at his narcissism, still intact despite everything. "You're still trying to make yourself the victim in this story. I hid who I was because I wanted to be loved for myself. You hid who you were because you were planning to rob me. We are not the same." "You were so naive," he said, echoing the words that had started everything. "You actually believed in love." "You were right about one thing," Brooke replied, her voice steady as granite. "I was naive. But naivety can be cured with experience. What you have, the selfishness, the cruelty, the complete inability to value anything beyond yourself, that's terminal." His face flushed red, but before he could respond, his lawyer grabbed his arm and forcibly walked him away. Brooke watched them go, feeling nothing but a vague sense of closure. Chase would spend the next several years in prison, then emerge to find an industry that had moved on without him, where his name was synonymous with scandal rather than success. That evening, Brooke sat in her father's study, sunset painting the ocean in shades of amber and gold. The letter he'd left with the estate documents lay on the desk, one she'd read countless times, but only now truly understood. "My dearest Brooke," it began in his precise handwriting. "If you're reading this, then you've finally claimed your inheritance. Not the money, that's just numbers and accounts, but the responsibility that comes with it. I kept this from you not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted you to discover who you were without its weight. True wealth isn't what you inherit. It's what you become when tested. I believe you'll become someone remarkable. Love always, Dad." Through the window, the ocean stretched endlessly, and somewhere beyond the horizon, the future waited. Not the future she'd planned with Chase, built on lies and hidden identities, but something real and solid and entirely her own. The empire she'd inherited had become something greater than her father had imagined. Not just profitable, but purposeful. The research team was thriving. The patents were being used to help people rather than just generate revenue, and the company bore her name with pride rather than shame. Brooke had spent 6 years hiding her wealth, testing a man's love, only to discover he'd failed the test so spectacularly that it almost seemed designed to teach her something crucial. That true power doesn't come from hiding or from the money itself, but from knowing when and how to reveal it. Leah Morrison had told her she was being replaced, had assumed she understood the power dynamics, had thought she was offering Brooke a reality check from a position of superiority. Instead, she'd triggered her own replacement, along with Chase's, as Brooke reclaimed not just her identity, but control of the empire she'd been building all along. Some women inherited fortunes and spent them. Others inherited fortunes and hid them. Brooke had done both and learned that neither brought happiness. True satisfaction came from using that fortune to build something meaningful, surrounded by people who valued loyalty over pedigree and truth over appearance. And in the end, when someone tried to replace her, she'd shown them exactly what it meant to be irreplaceable.